Hello again. It is a great honor and a privilege to end today's event with a presentation by Evan Medeiros, one of America's top foreign policy practitioners. Evan is a distinguished scholar in his own right, a strategic thinker, and also a good friend. This last panel concludes our conference highlighting the accomplishments and the perspectives of young experts in Sino-US relations. There's no better representative of the new generation of China scholars than Evan. We are particularly appreciative of Evan's effort to attend today's meeting right after returning from The Hague, where he was helping to coordinate a response to the current geopolitical situation in Europe. Luckily, today's topic of conversation is a bit more positive in nature, about strengthening bilateral relationship rather than to repair them. Now, I have known Evan for over a decade, just as I became a fan of Yao Ming when he was only 13 years old in the Shanghai basketball team. I became a fan of Evan when he worked as an international affairs scholar or fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations and wrote a famous article in Foreign Affairs. I think it's in 2003 about China's new diplomacy at the age of 19 or 18 at that time, 11 years ago. Now, he currently serves as the Senior Director of Asia Affairs in the National Security Council, the post that my senior colleagues here at Brookings, Ken Libersol, Jeff Bader, previously held, and also another former visiting scholar, Dennis Wild, also served that position, and he worked at the Brookings for a year. So I know that the U.S. China relationship is in good hands with Evan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the still very young, but the Senior Director of Asian Affairs in the White House, Dr. Evan Medeiros.
Li Cheng, thank you for that very gracious and kind introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to address this conference here today, and thank you for your friendship over the last decade. It's been fantastic. And the room today is filled with lots of friends, and it's just a wonderful opportunity to be able to join your conference today to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the U.S. China relationship. This is an auspicious occasion. 2014 is an important year. It's a year that the Obama administration sees as offering a unique opportunity to develop a relationship with China defined by more and better amounts of cooperation and coordination on the major global challenges before us today. Let me begin by just underscoring the importance of Li Cheng and the Brookings Institution convening this conference today. I can think of no better topics than sports diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and then, of course, the contribution of young scholars to the advancement of the U.S. China relationship. That's just a fantastic initiative. It's the work of young scholars in institutions in the United States and in China that's essential to ensuring that the U.S. China relationship continues to be propelled by lots of fresh thinking. And I know that because I experienced it myself. As a young scholar at the RAND Corporation, I spent a lot of time studying and doing research about the underlying dynamics in Chinese foreign policy, in U.S. China relations, and in East Asia more broadly. And it's that 7 to 8 years of research, the books, the articles, the conferences that inform much of my thinking about current U.S. policy toward China. So I commend you, Li Cheng, and the Brookings Institution for not only celebrating this important year, but also doing so by highlighting the work of young scholars, because I think that when we reflect on the past 35 years and when we look forward to the next 35 years, I think it is important that we have new faces, new thinking, fresh ideas, energy, and momentum, because that's going to be critical given the new and the different challenges facing us. What I thought I would do today is reflect very briefly on how I see the past 35 years in the U.S. China relationship in a very general way, and then talk about what I think are some of the important challenges going forward. First and foremost, it's important at an occasion like this to make sure we don't forget just how far we've come in the U.S.-China relationship in the past 35 years. It's easy to forget that. When President Nixon made his historic visit in 1972, the scars from the Korean War were still fresh. The Vietnam War was raging. We were in the middle of the Cultural Revolution, and I was 1 year old. But probably the most, or one of the most important features of the U.S.-China relationship in 1972, in that fateful year, was the fact that nothing about the future of the U.S.-China relationship was preordained. Nothing was inevitable. There was no certainty of the pathway of our two countries. How long would it take for our relationship to be normalized? How long would it take to fully institutionalize our relationship? At what point would we begin working together on major regional challenges? At what point would the United States and China become the two largest economies in the world and be central to ensuring that a global financial crisis does not become a global depression? None of that was certain at that time. And yet, when we look at the U.S.-China relationship today, we have a bilateral trade relationship that's $500 billion. 1.5 million tourists visit the United States every year. We have 200,000 Chinese students studying in the United States, more than any other country, and we have this great aspiration on the American side known as the 100,000 Strong, in which we seek to get 100,000 American students to study in China. But let's also keep in mind that not only have we traveled a long pathway and we've done a lot together, we've also weathered some very difficult time periods in the relationship. Events in 1989, 1999, 2001, 2012, there were some very difficult time periods, some problems that we had to work through. But what's important, the lesson that I take away from it, was that we worked through our problems. We found mechanisms that allowed us to address the difficulties on both sides and yet keep the relationship moving forward. And it's these difficulties, as hard as they were during those particular periods, that I think have made us stronger, has made the relationship more mature, and they afforded us opportunities to grow. And the question is, have we fully appreciated those opportunities? Have we fully studied the experiences of those difficulties? And are we drawing the right lessons for the future? And I think one of the most important lessons that I draw from both the growth that we've experienced in the relationship and the difficulties that we've navigated is that, simply put, it's profoundly in both countries' interests that we develop a more constructive and cooperative relationship. The United States supports a peaceful, prosperous, stable China, and we mean what we say. And it's, in some ways, a very fundamental commitment on both sides to this relationship that has provided a direction, a momentum, that has allowed us to stand here today and herald the accomplishments of 35 years. But there has to be more. There has to be more to the U.S.-China relationship than simply it's too big to fail. There has to be more than just an agreement that we need to have a constructive relationship. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. What is it in the next 35 years or the next 70 years that's going to be essential in order for us to keep the relationship on track, moving forward, and contributing to solving the essential regional and global problems that challenge the modern international order. It's my view that the U.S.-China relationship is not on autopilot by any means. That, in fact, it requires strong leadership, vision, determination, and very careful management by government officials in order to ensure that we continue to grow the relationship. It depends on deliberate choices of leaders in both countries that are focused on expanding our areas of cooperation, determining where it is our interests overlap, where there's domestic political space on both sides to pursue that, where there's capabilities on both sides and the political will in order to work on problems, but at the same time manage our differences. And that's what we mean when we talk about building a new model of relations between the United States and China. It's on the one hand expanding cooperation and coordination, on the other hand it's managing our differences. In other words, the new model is really about avoiding the old model. It's about avoiding that model where a rising power and an established power inevitably come into conflict. But of course, the question remains, how exactly do you do that? Our view is that fundamentally it begins with this the expanding cooperation, managing disagreements type of framework. And it's a difficult thing to do. It requires vision and determination, as I mentioned. Some in China say that in order to build this new model, the United States must accept and accommodate China's core interests. That's their definition. We simply have a different view. We think there's too much of a focus in the U.S.-China relationship on China's core interests. We spend far too much time talking about this issue. We need to focus less on core interests, and we need to focus more on common interests and ways in which we are acting together to solve those critical regional and global challenges that are consistent with all of our interests. Those challenges, I think, are very well known to this audience: climate change, nonproliferation, global growth, energy security. Solutions to all of these problems are going to require effort from the United States and from China. Neither one of us can do it alone, but both of us are essential to any kind of enduring solution. History is going to judge us on our ability to focus on our common interests, to put aside and carefully manage our disagreements in order to make progress in these areas. So the way we see it is that it's essential to build patterns of interaction that facilitate habits of cooperation in order to work together in practical, tangible, visible ways to solve these regional and global challenges I've talked about. We have sought to do that in the Obama administration. I know, I've been there since 2009. We began by rewiring the operation of the U.S.-China relationship. In the early days, I worked very closely with Jeff Bader, Kurt Campbell. We looked at the U.S.-China relationship, and we decided that we needed to make sure that the right people were talking about the right issues in the right ways at the right levels. And to do that required us to reconceptualize how our leaders and our senior officials were talking. And that's what resulted in some of the important mechanisms that we've built. We made sure, first and foremost, that our top leaders were talking much more frequently. As we all know, the relationship operates best when there's leader-to-leader communication in direct, clear ways. One of the most important lessons that I draw from the past 35 years of the U.S.-China relationship is that we work best together when our communication is clear and it's consistent and it's cooperative. And that's what building these patterns of interaction are all about. We created the Strategic and Economic Dialogue. The President designated the Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury as his key envoys. We created the Strategic Security Dialogue, in which we have American diplomats and American military officers talking with their counterparts in China from both the Foreign Ministry and the PLA. They're talking about those security issues that are controversial on both sides, but yet it's important that we have these conversations so we can understand better what our differences are, and then we can look for better ways to manage them and to find cooperative solutions. When it comes to ways in which the United States can work together with China to do on these defining challenges of our time, I think the United States and China need to elevate our ambitions. We simply need to be more ambitious in the next 35 years. There's some important, useful examples of our cooperation in the past few years. Iran and North Korea, the nuclear challenges presented by those countries, are areas where the U.S. and China have usefully worked together, and we need to continue to work together on them. In other areas, such as Afghanistan, South Sudan, counter-piracy in the Horn of Africa, there's been important cooperation as well. But yet there's more that we can do, and there's more that we should do together. The question is how do we ensure that we're having the right conversations to identify where those opportunities are? And we think that there are a variety of different opportunities in the clean energy space, in improving air quality, in cooperating on climate change, in the area of development assistance, public health, disease eradication, in responding to humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, and of course on nonproliferation. These are all areas where we believe that our interests overlap, where there's political space in both countries, there's political willingness to cooperate, where there's capabilities in order to contribute to solutions, and that the incentives for competition are minimal and can be managed. So we need to do better. So let's be more ambitious, and let's expand and build out the cooperative aspects of the U.S. China relationship. But there's another part of the equation, and that's our management of differences. And we need to pay attention to this because it's inevitable that there will be differences in a relationship as large and complex in ours. There are differences in perception, there's differences in interests, and both of these types of differences are prevalent and constrain our ability to work with one another. The policy challenge for us is how do we minimize these in a way that doesn't constrain our ability to cooperate, but doing so is a difficult task, I know, because it's something that I live on a day-to-day basis. I think in some areas, such as the military-to-military relationship in the last year, we've seen some strides. The quality of our dialogues have improved, and the pattern of our interactions, the frequency of our interactions are growing. The two presidents had a very substantive discussion at Sunnylands about ways where we can expand military-to-military cooperation, and we're looking at and we're studying a variety of confidence-building measures in both areas. But then there are perennial difficulties in the U.S.-China relationship that we need to pay close attention to as well. Take the issue of Taiwan. Our positions on this issue are well known. Henry Kissinger addressed this issue in the earliest stages of his interaction with China. President Xi and President Obama discussed the Taiwan issue just this week when they met together in The Hague. The exchange was what you would expect. China stated its position, the United States stated its position. Yet, unfortunately, after the meeting between the two presidents, the Chinese Foreign Ministry released a statement that willfully mischaracterized the U.S. position on Taiwan, as if our position on Taiwan had somehow changed. It has not. These kinds of actions are unwelcome, and it fosters mistrust between the United States and China. And we believe it's also unhelpful for China's goals. China should focus on winning the hearts and the minds of the people of Taiwan, as opposed to making them insecure about U.S. policy, as if somehow we have changed our position on Taiwan and are saying things differently in meetings with President Xi than we do publicly, which we aren't. So in this context, I think it's important to pay attention to the fact that not only is 2014 the 35th anniversary of the U.S.-China relationship, it's also the 35th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act, which is U.S. law and which we remain firmly committed, along with the 6 assurances. The Taiwan Relations Act, it's an important and it's an enduring expression to the people of Taiwan about our commitment to their well-being. their security, their economic autonomy, and their international space. The United States has an abiding interest in the peaceful resolution of the Taiwan question. And we commend the leadership in Beijing and in Taipei for the substantial steps that they have taken to improve China-Taiwan relations in recent years. The progress has been historic, and we hope that it continues in ways acceptable to both sides. Another issue of abiding U.S. interest is upholding basic international norms, such as protection of sovereignty and territorial integrity. This concept is at the heart of the modern state-centric international system. As we all know, it has its origins in the Treaty of Westphalia from 1648. China's position on protecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, I'm sure, is well known to many of you in the audience today. It's something that we're very clear about, and the Chinese government is very clear about publicly and privately. Yet the situation in Ukraine has raised questions. Russia's actions in Crimea are chipping away at the inviolability of this fundamental principle and has created uncertainty and instability in European security. We believe an erosion of these principles is destabilizing to East Asia as well, especially given the various territorial disputes in question. Yet despite this obvious challenge by Russia to these basic sacred principles at the heart of the modern international order, China's position on this has been unclear. China has not criticized Russia for the most serious violation of territorial integrity and sovereignty in decades. China abstained in both the UNGA vote yesterday and a UN Security Council vote a few weeks ago regarding the referendum in Crimea, producing uncertainty about how China defines its interests and how it pursues them. In 2008, I'm sure everybody was well aware of China's position on the issue of referendums. So are we to conclude that China's position on territorial integrity and sovereignty is conditional, that there are some caveats depending on China's other strategic imperatives? These are the kinds of questions that I think we need to be talking more about in the U.S.-China relationship. I know the United States has questions raised by China's position on Ukraine, and I think other countries in other parts of the world have questions as well, given China's stated commitment to territorial integrity and sovereignty, but yet its de facto support for Russia's position on Ukraine. As I mentioned, these are questions that we want to talk more about in the U.S.-China relationship. And at the heart of this task of managing our disagreements, managing our differences, is making sure that we can have substantive conversations about these questions and other questions in the U.S.-China relationship. Because it's only through a more consistent dialogue between our top leaders on even the most controversial questions that are difficult to talk about but require answers, it's only through that we're going to be able to manage our differences and our disagreements in a way that create the political space for us to continue to cooperate and manage mistrust in the relationship. So let me just conclude where I began, which is I think we're all students of U.S.-China relations. We need to redouble our efforts to understand the lessons that we can draw from the successes of the last 35 years in order to ensure that we're developing the patterns of interaction, the habits of cooperation that allow this relationship not to be defined by competition and strategic rivalry, but to be defined by better quality cooperation on the regional and global challenges, the contributions to public goods that I think need to define the U.S.-China relationship in order to ensure that we have a stable and productive future. So I think there's enormous potential in the U.S.-China relationship. I'm committed to realizing as much of that potential as I can. And I think it's important for all of us to remember that the future of this relationship is not preordained. It's the work of all of you in this room and all of the young scholars at the conference today that will help us realize the full potential for this relationship. And let's be as ambitious as we can as we look out to the next 35 years. Thank you very much. Thank you, Li Chun.
Just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Wow. Well, thank you so much for giving that very comprehensive, candid, and constructive remark. I know that the audience have a lot of questions. I have some questions. But due to that Evan's next engagement, we're not going to take any question. And I think that your speech will be read in so many corners of the world. It will be translated to so many different languages, and you will have a lot of questions in the future. But it's an excellent, very, in many ways, that you use the term ambitious, I think, several times. I do believe that, that we are so fortunate to have our policymakers and the White House to look at the more ambitious, to look about the future. This is itself is very, very encouraging. So I would like to ask the audience to join me to thank Evan for really finding his time in an extremely busy schedule to speak at Brookings. I hope that you will return and many times in the future.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you, and also safe trip back to China for our colleagues.